Welcome to Behind the Research, where we take you into the thinking, methods, approach, and even what we decided to cut from various episodes of Taste and See TV. Now, if you've not yet watched Taste and See TV, you can subscribe by heading to drinkoffering.tv, and you will get access to over 100 episodes from around the Bible lands that give you great perspectives, research points, humor, and different looks at biblical stories and histories, all with this amazing backdrop of the locations where these things happened. Now, today for Behind the Research, we are jumping into Season 4, Episode 54, from Turkey, specifically the area of the Euphrates River across to Haran and Şanlıurfa. And in that episode, we were talking about Abraham's language, his family, his adaptability. We talked about Bilhah and Zilpah. And so today we're going to delve a little bit deeper into the language aspect of it, and as well as where exactly is Abraham's Ur. Now, the language aspect of this episode was an interesting one because we didn't think it would be a controversial topic that we were cracking into, but then we got the emails and messages, and not necessarily bad, just more, Desiree, give your husband's head a shake. I think he got this one wrong. So we pointed to Amoritic as possibly being the language that Abraham spoke, and we put out a couple points, but we're going to delve a little bit deeper into this idea of why can we be somewhat confident to say Abraham didn't speak Hebrew, and certainly Adam didn't speak Hebrew. And what is the answer, right? And how can we not know what the answer is? That's spoiler. So if you don't know, the age-old narrative kind of goes like this. The mother language of humanity is Hebrew. That's the language that God put into the mind of Adam. So Adam spoke Hebrew. The entire old world before the flood spoke Hebrew. It passed down to Noah. Noah passed it to Shem. Shem passed it to his descendants, to Abraham. Abraham passed it to Moses and the Israelites. And it was largely the same language, unaltered, unchanged, because it's a divine language. So it hasn't changed. And with this idea, people run with the thought that one day we'll return to this original language. So first, where did this start? We always like doing that. We mentioned a bit on the episode, but late 1700s, early 1800s, linguists were trying to figure out how to branch the languages. How do the languages fit together? How do they develop? And this was a field of study that developed. These people were Bible readers and Bible advocates, so obviously they were looking to the Bible, to the Table of Nations and Noah's 3 sons. And this is where we got the idea that languages would fit into Semitic from Shem, Hamitic from Ham, Japhetic, or Indo-European as it's now known, right, from Japheth. And these languages could all be categorized accordingly, so obviously we would put Hebrew as being a Semitic language, Hittite and Egyptian are from Ham, so therefore that would be a Hamitic language, and it would fit nicely together. What was the problem? It doesn't work that way. We now know. When those theories were set, they didn't know how to speak Egyptian hieroglyphs still, or how to read it. They still didn't know how to read cuneiform. So they were basing it off basically Old Greek, Hebrew, and modern languages like French and English and Latin, things like this. They didn't have the ancient languages yet. So as they started to decipher these older languages, there were problems. Hamitic and Semitic started to blend into this Semito-Hamitic or Hamito-Semitic language, right? A blending of the two, right? Why? Well, we now call it the Afro-Asiatic branch of languages because Hebrew, which is from Shem, and Egyptian, which is from Ham, are in the same family. They're part of the same language group. They're connected, very similar. So how can a language from Ham and Shem be connected? Hittite, which again should be from Ham, is a Japhetic or an Indo-European language. So this is where a lot of people said, oh, well then the Hittites must not be the biblical Hittites because they're Japhetic. They're not from Ham. The ones in the Bible are Hamitic. And it's all based off language. So we're dismissing an entire body of evidence of the Hittites being the Hittites just because they spoke a Japhetic language. So it creates this mental gymnastics of trying to justify a theory that doesn't hold water anymore and didn't really hold water back then either. And we'll get into a thing about, are the Hittites actually Hittites? We'll do that at one point for Behind the Research. Stay tuned for that. But this basic idea of language developing, we now kind of understand that it would have started very, very simplistic. To say that Adam spoke intricate, well-developed language would just not be correct with what we know about language. I mean, after all, think that when you travel to another country, you often see things that you've never seen before, and you ask them, what is this? And so you add a new language or a new word to your lexicon. A good one from Israel is the Maktesh. We've taken you through the Makteshim before, these craters. So do you know how you say a Maktesh in German? Maktesh. In English, Maktesh. Why? Because the other languages didn't have a concept for it, so they adopted the Hebrew word. And so now it's an English word, and it's a German word, it's an Italian word. So this is how languages work, that they develop over time as you get these cultural, environmental, geographic influences. And so they grow and develop. We also can only really trace language back to the Chalcolithic period, where we start to see writing. Early Bronze Age. Languages like Sumerian, pre-dynastic Egyptian, Luwian, Carian, Malayan, Old Hittite, and maybe you've never even heard of some of those languages, but these are the foundation stones of the languages we have today. As time passed, these languages developed and expanded and grew and created new languages entirely. And we know how long it takes, roughly. We can measure it. Linguists estimate between 500 to 1,000 years for a language to become its own language and its own branch and incomprehensible to the original speaker. I'm going to give you a case in point of English. So 500 to 1,000 years is what linguists say. So we're going to go back 600 years to what's called Middle English. So why is it we have Modern English, we have Middle English? Why? Because it's kind of a different language. I'm going to read you a poem, and I'm going to butcher it. This is a Christian poem from Middle English, about 650 years ago. It goes like this. Now goth son underworld, mi roweth Marie the farrod, now goth son under tree, mi roweth Marie the son and thee. What does that say? Well, if you speak English, then you should have understood that I said, now the sun sets behind the forest, Mary, I pity your lovely face. Now the sun sets under the cross, Mary, I pity your son and you. So it's a different language. And that's only 600 years of English. That you get some elements of our English in it, but it's really distorted. Then you go back 1,000 years, go back to Old English. Try and read Beowulf. I'll put it on the side. This is the opening few lines of the story of Beowulf from Old English. Now, if you saw that and identified that as English right off the bat, then, I mean, I have a lot of respect for you, because I wouldn't have picked that as being English, right? But it is. That's the origin of what we speak. And you see how when we're removed 1,000 years, if a person comes up speaking like this to us, it's a different language. Now, we still call it English, but it's not English in any discernible way to us modern speakers. Now, unless you're a scholar, really smart, I don't know. But we jump back to Noah, right? Adam, these ones. So we look at that same span of time, 500 years to 1,000 years. Whatever language Noah spoke, let's say it's Hebrew, okay, in the same way it's English. The difference of Noah to Abraham is the difference of modern Hebrew to, or modern English to Middle English, right? Where you're not quite getting it anymore. But then to go from Noah to Moses, you're now looking at a difference even greater, perhaps, of Old English to Modern English, where the two could not speak to each other. It's too different of a language. And we add to it that the Israelites, obviously we brought out in the episode, they were in Egypt for 300 plus years. So we should expect that Hebrew and Egyptian are in the same family because they were culturally assimilated for a substantial period of time. Again, 300 plus years, it only takes 500 years for a language to really develop. So for the majority of that time, Hebrew is now coming out of Egypt as a very different language than what it would have gone in as, and therefore you can't call it the same language. So that's where you get the pushback. Sometimes you get documentaries where they show like Proto-Synatic and stuff, and they try and fight this, and linguists go, look, I see what you're saying, but that's not Hebrew. And they go, oh, they hate the Bible. It's not about that. It's that categorically, it does not have, it's like Germanic and English, Latin and English. Yet I understand what you're saying, that's the root, but it's not the same language. So we get it. So now, where did we get this from, this Adam spoke Hebrew model? It comes from two arguments that we're going to go into a little deeper. First is the naming of the animal theory. And we'll hear this, that we know Adam spoke Hebrew because when you look at the names of the animals in Hebrew, you see Adam's touch of observing and naming animals. And the often cited example is the stork, which is hasadeh in Hebrew. That means righteous. The stork is a righteous bird. When you observe it, it takes care of its young, it's very loving and nurturing, it's a righteous bird. And we go, there you go. Dog is another example, kelev. Kelev, it's thought to come from two words, kol lev, all heart. You look at a dog, it's all heart. Look at our dog, this thing's all heart, right? So we go, okay, so Adam's observing the animals, he's naming them in Hebrew. But that's not the case for all the animal names in Hebrew. A lot of them, they don't actually know the etymology. They don't know the origin of the name for that animal because it doesn't have any real discernible meaning in Hebrew, which is the other aspect, that we have this in every language, not just that we don't quite know the origin of where this name came from or we can trace it back, but we also have the example where the animal is named off characteristics like we see in Hebrew. This isn't exclusive to Hebrew. Russian is a nice example. Medved. Do you know what medved is? The bear. Okay. What does medved mean? Well, you know it's a bear because medved means honey eater. What eats honey? A bear. So it's the bear. Now, does that mean Adam spoke Slavic? No. That's just how we name animals. That's just natural to humans, is we name them off what we observe. And so the idea that we can see the names of animals in Hebrew being described, and so therefore that's Adam's language, it's not an argument because it's observable in almost every language. So that's just a characteristic of biology, shall we say, naming the animals and how we choose to name animals. Now there's a second theory as to how we get this, and that's the Melchizedek theory. This one's going to be the sentimentality one, so full warning on this one. We're going to rip the Band-Aid off here, which if I remember right, we did do this in the episode a bit. We've done this a few times, but the argument goes like this. Shem was Melchizedek. Melchizedek spoke to Abraham. Abraham spoke Hebrew. Therefore, Shem spoke Hebrew. So that's the argument. And if Shem spoke Hebrew, Noah spoke Hebrew. If Noah spoke Hebrew, Adam spoke Hebrew. Right? That's the Melchizedek language theory. What's the problem? There's a lot of problems. First, again, you're assuming Abraham spoke Hebrew. But let's assume he did. You're then assuming that Melchizedek is Shem. And this is a touchy one for Christians. And people go, why are you going here, David? Because it has to be gone there. This is a rabbinic tradition from the 400s, 500s, like that period. It's from the commentaries of the Bible. It's from rabbis. So if you believe that the rabbis of the 4th to 10th century CE were inspired of God to give divine revelations, then okay, Melchizedek is Shem. But if you don't think that those rabbis were inspired of God, then in the 1st century, what did the Jews believe? They simply believed that Melchizedek was a Canaanite king. a righteous king and a priest to the Most High God, and a faithful priest. But it was Melchizedek itself is just a title. It was just a title for King of Righteousness, for the King of Jerusalem. Whoever the King of Jerusalem was had that title, Melchizedek. And the reasoning on that is because that name appears again in the life of Joshua. Who's the King of Jerusalem in Joshua's lifetime? It's Adonizedek. Adonizedek means Lord of Righteousness. Malchi, Adoni, interchangeable. My Lord, my King. Like, an argument could easily be made that it's the same title, just adapted over time, that it went from King of Righteousness to Lord of Righteousness, but it's the same title. And so, you know, there's the connection to Jesus of Jesus as a priest in the manner of Melchizedek, and as a type antitype. And it's not to say that's not a true type antitype. Melchizedek was a priest of the Most High God, a righteous priest, a good priest, and he comes out of nowhere. He's like, the start time, the end time is indeterminate. It's the same as Jesus. We don't really know exactly, like, from time indefinite to time indefinite, he's a high priest, you could say. Okay, so it's still a fitting type antitype. But then why doesn't Moses just call Melchizedek Shem? Which Shem is also an interesting one, because do you know what Shem means in Hebrew? Name. So again, if Noah spoke Hebrew, then he named his son Name. I'm going to name you Name. It's odd, right? It's kind of strange, but like, why doesn't Moses make the connection? Why doesn't the later Greek scriptures make the connection of saying Jesus would be a priest in the manner of Shem, who was called Melchizedek? Like, there's no connection. And so to say that it's biblical that Melchizedek is Shem is not correct. It's not true. There is no biblical evidence. It's not biblically stated that Melchizedek is Shem. This is an interpretation and a belief, and a beloved belief, but it's not actually there. So the idea of connecting the language of the Israelites to Shem via Melchizedek, it's without basis. Sorry. I mean, we're trying to be honest on this one. It's sentimental, and I'll probably get a lot of emails again about this one, but again, do the research. Do the research, read the Bible. There it is. So now we're going to shift gears. We're going to talk about Abraham's city, which we alluded to at the end of the episode. We filmed this in Shenlurfa. We didn't quite realize. I didn't know that there was a chance that Abraham's Ur in Mesopotamia was not Abraham's Ur. Probably like you, I had never had this thought before that could not be the place. It's the place. So it was surprising to me and very interesting as a study project, and that's why we like sharing these things, where this developed. Because as we walked through Shenlurfa, which was a beautiful city, everything was Abraham this, Abraham that. We thought it was a connection to Haran, but it's because they really believe this is Ur. Shenlurfa simply means the great city of Urfa, and Urfa is thought to originally have been Ur. So where did we get southern Mesopotamia, Ur? This is from an archaeologist named Leonard Woolley. Very prominent, very influential archaeologist. He discovered this Ur in southern Mesopotamia. Amazing archaeological site. It's not to take away from what Woolley found. A ziggurat that was rebuilt by Nebuchadnezzar. Nebuchadnezzar was a Chaldean. Therefore, this Ur would be Ur of the Chaldeans. And so it made headlines around the world. It sparked imaginations because we can now give Abraham a backstory. We could now put him in a city with a culture and a lifestyle, and it was fantastic. And everyone was on board, and all the maps changed, all the Bible stories changed, except for his own archaeological team. I don't know of any other instance where the archaeological team dissents from the lead archaeologist on the conclusion. Where so much so that they write a competing paper saying, no, he's wrong, he's lying to you. He's doing this for promotion and publicity and research funding and stuff. That's it. The real Ur is in Shenlurfa. That's what the dissenting team said. It's very interesting, and they asserted that basically Woolley wasn't being honest about this. He was trying to prove a point. you kind of see the point he's making in his book, Abraham. I'm going to read you a quote from this and see what you take away from this. Ready? Quote, Abraham did not come away from Ur empty-handed. He brought with him a pride in his upbringing, in the greatness of his city. He brought with him these stories of the world's creation and of the flood, which, moralized by his descendants, have been as history or as parable treasured by half the world for 4,000 years. He brought with him the laws of Ur and, handing them down through the generations of his house, laid the foundation of that Mosaic code, which is still the law of the Jews and is professedly adopted by most Christian nations as the basis of their own systems. So the charge was Woolley was trying to get more money. What's Woolley saying with this quote? I didn't just find the city of Abraham. I found the origin of the Bible. I found the source of all Judeo-Christian belief, the source of all of our law codes, all of our belief in creation, all of our belief in a deluge. I found it in this city. It all started from Ur and Sumerian mythology. A cheap imitation. That's what Abraham repackaged for his descendants. So now that you know kind of what the whole context of Woolley's assertion was, are you feeling a little uncomfortable that this is Ur? So, a lot of his colleagues push back on it. Cuneiform scholar Eric Burroughs, very famous scholar, he time and again said, quote, we simply don't know if that's true. There is not enough evidence, end quote. Time and again he would tell people this because he strongly believed that Woolley was wrong on this. That not only was this not Abraham's Ur, but this idea that the flood and creation and all these myths of the Bible or legends of the Bible or stories of the Bible, whatever archaeologists and scholars want to call it, that what we have in the Bible today came from Ur was wrong, categorically wrong. So they really pushed hard against it. Woolley was determined. He dug a 30-foot trench right through the city and trying to prove the flood. He found a 12-foot layer of silt, 3.5 meters of silt, separating the city from a settlement. And he said, there you go, I'm right. The flood legend just comes from Ur, from flooding in Ur. This is where it gets it from. And this is why we don't like comparative mythology, because we don't really know the origin of Sumerian mythos and Akkadian mythos and Greek mythos. We don't really know the origin. And so to say, well, it came from the Bible, that's where scholars and archaeologists that are against the Bible just flip it and go, yeah, but which was written first? The Sumerian was written first, therefore the Bible's a copy of the Sumerian. If we're going to trust the oldest version, we should trust the Sumerian one, not the biblical one. So that's the problem with comparative mythology and why we really don't like it, and we push against it all the time. But, this layer of silt, a lot of Christians used it as evidence of the flood. And again, it's running ahead before we have enough evidence, because it's years later, decades later, that they find in the Indian Ocean the Burkle impact crater. If you don't know that, check that out, the Burkle impact crater. This is a 29-kilometer wide crater at the bottom of the Indian Ocean. So this whatever it was, hit the ocean, which is, it's penetrating the ocean at such force that it can still create a 29-kilometer wide impact crater. So imagine the tsunamis and mega tsunamis, and we see the evidence of the tsunamis at coastlines around the Indian Ocean. But one of the trajectories, as they work out the trajectory of these tsunamis, is Ur. And so this layer of silt that lines up chronologically, how much you trust chronology is up to you, but it seems to line up with that layer of silt, that this may have just been from a massive mega tsunami from the Burkle crater and had nothing to do with the deluge. It's too early to have made those assertions, but Woolley ran with it. So now let's flip and so what did they dissent? What were their other actual arguments at the time? One was simply the road, that the pathway doesn't make sense. For Abraham to go from that Ur all the way up to Haran and then across to Carchemish and then back down, that makes no sense. No sense. The argument often used is, well, those highways were not good. Abraham wouldn't have taken them. That's not true. These highways connected Mari, which was one of the biggest cities of Abraham's lifetime, perhaps even more important than Ur was, with other pivotal cities like Ugarit and Aleppo and Tadmor. So these were major roads and well maintained, as well as they could be maintained in this early Bronze Age, Middle Bronze Age period. So these were good roads. There's no reason for Abraham to bypass them to go to Haran. The Shanlurfa theory flips it where it's a very simple, straightforward path. He's going from the north straight south to Canaan. Stops off in Haran because his dad got sick. Dad dies. He continues on the same path he was going. He doesn't do this weird double backing and looping and at one point walk away the opposite direction of Canaan. So that was the one argument. It's just too far away. Woolley's counter-argument was simply that Shanlurfa is too close to Haran. That, what Terah packs up his family and moves 40 kilometers away, that's not dramatic. But again, when you just go back to the Bible, it's only from Woolley that we get this idea that it was this grand epic journey of Terah leaving his family going to southern Mesopotamia. The Bible doesn't indicate that Terah followed the path of Nimrod, which is another aspect, that if Abraham was a faithful man from a faithful family, we know Terah was a maker of idols, but it's like, why would you live in the cities of Nimrod? Why would you follow that path? Why would you live in a city so steeped in idolatry and paganism and against godliness, right? Like this is the opposite of what Abraham believed. Why would he go there and stay his whole life there? Much of his life, 75 years, he lived there happily amongst this pagan culture, when his homeland was Shanlurfa. Shanlurfa is where? Shanlurfa is the foothills of Urartu. Urartu is Ararat. This is where the ark came to rest. He came from the land where the ark was, and may have still been present at the time. You may have still been able to go see it. The land of, like, where Göbekli Tepe is not far away. That this is the cradle of civilization. This is where everything starts. That this may have been where Noah and his descendants were still directly living and continuing on the original practices of pure worship. So why would you leave that to live in Ur? Spiritually, it doesn't make sense. So there's a lot of problems, but then the nail in the coffin that only kind of got revealed after Woolley passed is this aspect of Ur, the Chaldeans. So where were the Chaldeans? And Bible advocates use this in favor of that Ur, because they say, look, the ziggurat was built by Nebuchadnezzar. Nebuchadnezzar was Chaldean. Isaiah, Jeremiah, Nehemiah all talk about Babylon being Chaldean. Ur's Chaldean. What's the problem? The problem is that only happened around the year 800 to 1000 BCE. During Abraham's life, the Chaldeans were not in Babylon. They moved in by conquest 1200 years later. So yes, in Isaiah's life and Jeremiah's life, it was Babylon of the Chaldeans. It was Ur of the Chaldeans. But in Abraham's life, where were the Chaldeans? Where's the homeland of Chaldea? Shanlurfa. It's eastern Anatolia, Armenia, that area. That's the homeland of the Chaldeans. So we know this as an archaeological fact now. So then the problem becomes, if Moses was the one that wrote Ur of the Chaldeans, then it cannot be Mesopotamian Ur. So you're left with only two choices. Option one is Moses did not write that. He only wrote Ur, and of the Chaldeans was added as an anachronism by later scholars. Later scholars added of the Chaldeans so that people knew it was a Babylonian one. But that was added like 1200, 1500 years later. The Bible was altered. So that's an option. And the reality is we don't have an answer. We don't really have a way to know at this time which one it is. I mean, unless at some point they do excavations in Shanlurfa and find a house with a plaque saying, something scribbled on the wall going, "I'm Abram. I'm leaving with my family for Canaan at the will of God. See y'all in the future." Unless you find that, you're not gonna overturn. There's too much invested in Woolley's idea. It's been too well adopted. You would need such a mountain of evidence coming out of Shanlurfa to overturn it, and it's just not going to happen anytime soon. So it's interesting to ponder, this northern theory. How was Abraham able to speak to Hittites and Amorites and Canaanites? Well, because that was the language of Shanlurfa. But then if he's in Mesopotamia, then it means that he was adaptable. It means he took on different languages, different cultures, which means that his own language was then influenced and morphed and changed from what it originally was. So, we have no answers, only questions and research and fun research. Hopefully you didn't clutch your pearls too much during this episode. There's a lot of hitting on the sentimentality and beloved narratives, but it's fun to delve into. And the reason is why people will go, why? If this is controversial, if you're stirring the pot with what people really wholeheartedly believe, why would you go down this road? For me, I believe it's important. It's important for you to know what the archaeological ground is that we're standing on. To understand that mainstream academia, which is largely against the Bible, is on very shaky ground. And comes with it a lot of debate and contention, even by the people working on it, that yes, Woolley got the final say, but everyone around him was not in agreement. That this was a vocal minority pushing the narrative, not the majority. And so when we look to archaeology for the Bible, we want to be careful, because we want to understand that archaeology is not really a science yet. It's not on solid ground, and it's not to be trusted, and we don't put faith in archaeology the same way we would put faith in the words of the Bible. So, that's Behind the Research. Hope you enjoyed it. We'll see you on the next one.